Have you ever stopped to wonder how many secrets have been buried by time? How many stories have been purposefully silenced, hidden from humanity, so that we would never come close to the truth? What if I told you there is a forbidden part of history, a hidden mystery involving the African gods, deities so powerful and enigmatic that to this day they remain surrounded by fear, respect, and prohibitions? This is not just an ancient narrative or a simple legend passed down through generations. It is a treasure trove of ancestral knowledge that has been kept secret, stifled by centuries of colonization, religious persecution, and historical manipulation. What we will explore here is something few have had the courage to reveal: the forbidden story of the African gods that has never been told in its entirety. Since ancient times, Africa has been the birthplace of grand cultures, sacred rituals, and mythologies so profound they are intertwined with the very creation of the universe. But have you ever wondered why almost none of this reaches us clearly? Why, over the centuries, have the powers that dominated the world strived so hard to erase, distort, and marginalize this knowledge? The answer is simple and, at the same time, disturbing. Knowledge is power, and the power of African gods, with their stories of strength, resilience, and spirituality, could transform not only how we understand the past, but also how we view the present. Imagine a pantheon of deities who not only inhabit distant myths, but who are directly linked to the forces of nature, to the waters that flow in rivers, to the thunder that splits the sky, to the fire that transforms and renews, to the wind that blows through the trees, and even to the fate of humanity. These gods are not unattainable figures, isolated in inaccessible temples, but living, spiritual, and energetic presences that have shaped the lives of entire peoples. They represent the balance between the visible and the invisible, between the physical and the spiritual, between life and death. But why, then, was this story considered forbidden? Why, instead of being revered as symbols of wisdom, strength, and spirituality, were these gods labeled dangerous, demonized, and persecuted? What was so powerful about them that provoked such fear in dominant religions and cultures? It is at this point that the mystery deepens, revealing how colonization and slavery not only uprooted millions of people from their lands, but also attempted to strip them of their faith, their identity, and their connection with the gods who had always protected them. This imposed silence was no accident. It served to break spiritual bonds, erase memories, and rewrite history according to the interests of those in power. But despite all efforts to stifle this legacy, the secrets survived. They endured in songs, in dances, in disguised rituals, in whispered words, in hidden symbols that traveled from generation to generation. The forbidden knowledge of the African gods crossed seas, traversed time, and reached us, ready to be rediscovered. And it is precisely this reunion that makes this journey so fascinating. Every detail, every legend, every aspect of these gods carries within it not only an ancient story, but also a revelation that can help us better understand who we are and where we come from. By delving into this hidden mystery, we are not just exploring mythology. We are touching upon truths that have been hidden and that now have the chance to emerge from the shadows. Get ready, because with each revelation, with each passage of this forbidden story, you'll realize you're not just watching a video, but participating in a powerful and transformative rescue. The veil of mystery is about to be lifted, and what comes next could completely change the way you view the sacred, history, and the very destiny of humanity. Now that you've begun delving into this hidden mystery, I want to hear your opinion. What do you think was the real reason this forbidden history of the African gods was hidden for so long? Leave your perspective in the comments, because the exchange of ideas is essential for us to keep this reflection alive and further expand the debate. As we delve into this hidden mystery, we arrive at one of the most intriguing and at the same time most painful points: the silencing of history. It's impossible to understand the true dimension of African gods without understanding how, over the centuries, entire traditions were silenced, distorted, and rewritten to fit narratives that benefited only the dominators. The forbidden history of African gods was not forgotten by accident, but deliberately erased, as if a veil had been cast over it so that we would never come close to the true essence of this spirituality. Imagine thousands of years of culture, ancestral wisdom, sacred rituals, and profound mythologies being reduced to caricatures, demonized, and treated as inferior. That's exactly what happened. When we speak of African traditions, we are talking about people who had an intimate relationship with nature, who saw the sacred in every detail of life. The thunder that splits the sky, the river that nourishes the earth, the wind that blows bringing invisible messages. Every natural phenomenon was an expression of a divinity, of a greater force, of a God who governed the order of the universe. But when the colonizers arrived, bringing with them their religions, their economic and political interests, this connection was considered dangerous. Dangerous because it represented resistance. Dangerous because it strengthened the identity of the African people. Dangerous because it could not be controlled. So what did they do? They demonized. They ridiculed. They rewrote. What was divine came to be called pagan. What was sacred came to be considered diabolical. It's shocking to think how this process of silencing wasn't just religious, but also cultural and political. By stripping African peoples of their right to worship their gods, tell their stories, and practice their rituals, the dominators were attempting to strip away something much deeper: the soul, identity, and spiritual strength of these communities. This didn't happen quickly. It was a long and painful process, comprised of persecution, punishment, and prohibition. Imagine entire generations being forced to hide their beliefs, to transform rituals into masked celebrations, to keep secret what was once celebrated in public. This is the true weight of silencing. But even in the face of this oppression, the flame never went out. African peoples found creative and courageous ways to keep the essence of their gods alive. They sang in codes, danced in rhythm, and hid symbols within seemingly common practices. What seemed like just a popular festival was actually an ancestral ritual in disguise. What seemed like just a simple song carried within it the call of the Orishas. This silent resistance is proof that African spirituality is far stronger than any attempt at erasure. Have you ever stopped to reflect on how this distortion still resonates today? Even today, when we talk about African gods, many people still harbor prejudices, still believing in stories created to devalue this culture. This shows how profound the impact of this silencing has been. What was sown back then continues to be reaped now. The demonization of rituals, the marginalization of beliefs, the widespread ignorance of the richness of these traditions. All of this is a direct reflection of centuries of distortion, and that's precisely why we need to reclaim this forbidden history. This is why I made my digital book available, To Reveal the Apocalypse, which you can download immediately through the first comment set. This book will help you discover all the mysteries of the apocalypse and transform your life. Access the first comment set to get your copy, because very few remain and will soon be withdrawn. Don't waste time. Click now and make sure your digital copy. Imagine how different it would be if, from an early age, we had learned about these gods the way we learn about Greek or Norse mythology. If in schools it were common to hear about Oxum, Yansan, Zango, Ogum, and Obatala, just as we hear about Zeus, Athena, and Thor, the cultural and spiritual impact would be immense. But no, that didn't happen. Because someone decided these stories should remain hidden, shrouded in the shadows, treated as taboo. Silence, in this case, is not just the absence of a voice. It is a calculated project to prevent entire generations from recognizing their ancestral power. And perhaps this is the most intriguing point of this whole issue. The more they tried to silence them, the stronger these traditions became. Because they survived in bodies, in memories, in everyday practices. They survived in music, in dance, in cuisine, in the way African and Afro-descendant communities continued to relate to the sacred, even if veiled. It's as if African gods had found invisible ways to continue existing, even amidst the most brutal oppression. And don't forget to get your digital book, Unraveling the Apocalypse. It is very important that you purchase it quickly before the copies run out. Now stop and think with me. Why was this knowledge considered so dangerous? Why did they try so hard to hide it? Perhaps because they knew that African gods represent not only mythological stories, but also a force of empowerment, a direct link to the identity and freedom of people. By knowing and recognizing these gods, people discover their roots, their strength, their essence. And this, for the dominators, was unacceptable. It's at this point that I want to invite you to reflect and comment below. Do you believe history would have been different if these traditions hadn't been silenced? Write the phrase, "Silence didn't erase the truth," in the comments to show that you're also part of this recovery. I'd love to hear your perspective on this historical erasure, because the more we share our reflections, the more we break this cycle of silence and recover the true history of African gods. When we speak of the origin of African gods, we enter an even deeper and more mysterious territory, a point where myth and reality meet inseparably. This is where African spirituality reveals its grandeur, showing how different peoples saw the creation of the world not as a distant story or a worthless legend, but as a living part of their own existence. Contrary to what we've often been taught, African myths are not just folklore narratives. They are true spiritual maps, guides that explain the order of the universe, the relationship between humans and nature, and the fundamental role of the gods in maintaining the balance of life. And it is at this point that we can understand why this knowledge was considered so dangerous by those who tried to erase this culture, because it carries an ancestral wisdom that connects past, present, and future. In African traditions, the creation of the world is deeply linked to the presence of the gods, each responsible for a fundamental aspect of existence. These are not just distant gods inhabiting an inaccessible sky, but living forces, present in every river, every stone, every tree, every ray of sunlight. The world was not created coldly and mechanically, but through a divine interaction, where each element carries with it the energy of an Orisha, a divinity that not only gave rise to life, but continues to actively participate in it. This detail is essential to understanding the difference. We are not talking about stories frozen in time, but about a cosmogony that renews itself every day, that breathes alongside those who believe. Consider, for example, the symbolism of water. For many African peoples, water is not just a natural resource, but the primordial womb of creation, the space where life begins. From it emerge the gods, from it spring the paths of destiny, from it spring the possibility of renewal. This is why deities linked to rivers, seas, and rain are so centrally important. Fire, with its power of destruction and transformation, is seen as a creative and regenerative energy, linked to the force of thunder, the heat of the sun, and the flame of life. The earth, in turn, is not just soil, but the sacred body that nourishes and welcomes, the dwelling place of spiritual forces, and a silent witness to all that exists. And air, invisible but present everywhere, is the divine breath that gives movement, that connects worlds and carries messages between humans and gods. This integrated vision shows how the origin of African gods is directly related to universal balance. Nothing exists in isolation, everything is connected, and creation myths reinforce precisely this idea of unity. This perception completely breaks with the notion of separation between the sacred and the profane, because for these people, everything is sacred, everything bears the mark of divinity. When we look at it from this perspective, it becomes clear how ancestral African knowledge is, in fact, an invitation to a different way of seeing life, one where spirituality and everyday life are not separate, but rather coexist. And here's a crucial point. These myths weren't just told to entertain, but to educate, guide, and strengthen collective identity. Each generation grew up hearing stories that not only explained how the world came to be, but also taught values, ethics, respect for nature and community. It was from the origin of the gods that the foundation of life and society was formed. Myths were the school, the temple, the spiritual constitution of a people. When an elder told the creation narrative, he wasn't just transmitting a story, he was transmitting power, strengthening the connection between the living and the divine. Now, imagine the shock when these cosmologies were confronted with the colonizers' view, which classified all of this as superstition or witchcraft. This is another aspect of the silencing we've already discussed, but it takes on an even greater dimension here, because erasing the origins of African gods meant not only silencing stories, but also breaking the roots of spiritual identity. But, as with other aspects of tradition, these narratives survived, hidden in chants, preserved in symbols, disguised in rituals that, on the surface, seemed simple, but on the inside carried centuries of wisdom. And perhaps you're wondering, how have these stories managed to survive so long? The answer lies in the power of orality. African cultures have always valued the spoken word as something sacred, capable of giving life and preserving eternal truths. A myth told by an elder was not just repetition, but recreation, because each time the narrative was told, it gained new layers, new meanings, always remaining relevant. This orality is the key that has ensured that the origins of African gods have not been lost, even in the face of the most brutal oppression. It's incredible to realize how, even today, when someone participates in a ritual, chants, or makes an offering, they are in fact reviving and updating these creation narratives. The origin of African gods is not something distant, but something present, pulsating and continually shaping lives. And that's precisely why we need to talk about it, bring this story to light, break down prejudices, and show that this ancestral wisdom is not just part of the past, but also a key to the present and the future. And now I'd love to hear from you who are following along. Have you ever heard about the origins of African gods? Which part of this cosmogony most captures your attention? The power of water, the power of fire, the energy of the earth, or the breath of air? Leave the phrase, "creation lives in us," in the comments to show that you, too, recognize this ancestral connection. Your participation is essential for us to continue strengthening this journey, because each comment is like an echo that keeps this forbidden history alive. As we continue our journey into this hidden mystery, we reach a point that awakens even more fascination: the Orishas and their cosmic forces. So far, we've discussed the silencing of history and the origins of African gods. But now we enter a universe where each deity manifests itself not only as myth, but as living energy, present in everyday life and in everything that surrounds us. The Orishas are more than symbolic figures. They are representations of cosmic forces that govern the balance of life, expressing the cycles of nature, human feelings, inner struggles, and collective destinies. And it is precisely at this point that we understand the depth of this spirituality, because the Orishas do not live in a distant or inaccessible place. They are in motion, present in the sound of thunder, the brightness of the waters, the warmth of the sun, the strength of the earth, the blowing wind, in every gesture of existence. Each Orixa is an expression of an aspect of life, which means that by connecting with them, we are not simply worshiping external deities, but recognizing within ourselves these forces that inhabit nature and the spirit. For example, think of Zango, Lord of Justice, Thunder, and Fire. When thunder splits the heavens, it is not just a physical phenomenon, but a manifestation of Zango's cosmic power, which brings balance and righteousness, representing the fight against injustice. Meanwhile, Oxum, linked to fresh waters, brings with her sweetness, fertility, and prosperity, demonstrating that care and gentleness are also transformative forces. Ogum, with his mastery of iron and war, represents struggle, protection, and the opening of paths, revealing the importance of courage in the face of challenges. And it doesn't stop there, because each Orixa has a field of action that transcends the visible. Yansa, for example, is the movement, the storm, the energy that renews and sweeps away what needs to be transformed. Obatala is wisdom, creation, the guiding light. Exu, often misunderstood due to centuries of prejudice and silencing, is the messenger, the one who opens the paths and connects the human to the divine. Each of them is a pillar, a force that cannot be ignored, because they are deeply rooted in the most fundamental elements of the universe. What makes this cosmology so powerful is the way it intertwines with human life. Each person, according to tradition, has a special connection with certain Orixas, and this connection shapes their characteristics, paths, and even challenges. It's not a fixed destiny, but rather energy in motion, which can be understood, balanced, and strengthened. It's as if the Orixas were cosmic mirrors, reflecting in us the same energy that moves the world. And that's why their cults, chants, and dances are so important, because they are not mere external rituals, but practices that harmonize the soul with the universe. This vision reveals something essential. African spirituality does not separate the human from the sacred. The Orishas are not distant. They are not unreachable. On the contrary, they are companions, guides, forces that walk alongside human beings at every step. This proximity is one of the reasons why this tradition has always posed a threat to those who have tried to silence it. Because it places no barriers between the divine and the people, it does not limit access to the sacred. Everyone can connect. Everyone can feel this energy. Everyone can invoke the cosmic forces that the Orishas represent. Now think with me. How many times have you witnessed natural phenomena and considered them merely physical events? A strong wind that arrives suddenly, a storm that transforms the sky, the sunrise after a dark night. For African cosmology, none of this is mere chance. Everything is a manifestation of divine forces in action. This perception invites us to look at the world differently, to perceive the invisible behind the visible, to recognize that the sacred is everywhere. This connection also strengthens the identity of those who worship the Orishas, because each chant, each drumbeat, each offering is a way of communicating with the cosmos, of keeping alive the ancestral energy that spans generations. When a drum sounds in homage to an Orisha, it is not just music. It is the vibration that awakens divine energy, connecting the present to the past and opening portals to the future. It is in this sense that the Orishas become cosmic forces, because their existence transcends time and space, remaining active in every ritual, in every prayer, in every memory. And here I want to challenge you, the viewer. Have you ever stopped to think about which Orishas you most identify with? Do you carry the warrior strength of Ogum, the sweetness of Oxum, the intensity of Iansa, or the wisdom of Obatala? This reflection is powerful because it brings us even closer to the cosmic energy they represent. Leave the phrase, "My energy is divine," in the comments to show that you, too, recognize this connection with the Orishas. Also, share if there is one of them that most resonates with you, because your interaction will strengthen this dialogue and keep alive this tradition that, for too long, was silenced, but which we now have the opportunity to reclaim and cherish together. As we delve even deeper into this hidden mystery, we reach a dimension few dare to explore, the forgotten and forbidden gods. So far, we've discussed the silencing of history, the origins of African gods, and the cosmic power of the Orishas. However, there is a spiritual realm that remains in the shadows, kept secret for generations, and it is precisely there that the enigma intensifies. We're not just talking about the best-known deities, revered in popular rituals, but also about those sacred figures who were deliberately left aside, hidden, because their powers, stories, and practices were considered so powerful that they could shake the established order. These forbidden gods represent the most hidden side of African spirituality, and their memory endures through fragments of chants, symbols silently engraved, and secret rituals performed far from the eyes of those who would destroy this tradition. These lesser-known deities did not disappear. They simply took refuge in invisible spaces, protected by the wisdom of those who understood that not everything could be revealed. Imagine entire villages that had to hide their cults in forests, caves, and isolated riverbanks, transforming each encounter into a pact of resistance. What colonizers and dominant religious groups considered witchcraft, for the initiated, was direct contact with ancestral forces capable of guiding destinies, protecting communities, and revealing secrets of the universe. The occult rituals associated with these forbidden gods were not mere ceremonies, but true spiritual portals, where the human and the divine met in an experience of power few could comprehend. Consider, for example, deities associated with occult knowledge, those who ruled not only visible nature, but also the invisible mysteries of spirit and transformation. Many of these forces were feared because they dealt with the unknown, with that which escapes human control. In a world where rulers sought to impose rigid rules of faith, any contact with the occult was seen as a threat, and so these gods were labeled as dangerous. But was the danger truly in them, or in the fear that the people would gain access to a power that could not be controlled? This is the question that leads us to reflect on the true reason why so many names and stories were erased or hidden. And don't think these secret rituals were fragile or improvised. On the contrary, they were conducted with discipline, respect, and a wisdom passed down only to a select few. There were specific chants, precise movements, and symbolic offerings that connected the community with the energy of these forgotten gods. Every detail had meaning. Every gesture carried an invisible power. Many of these rituals were performed at night, harnessing the silence and darkness as allies, creating an atmosphere of mystery and protection. Secrecy was the key to survival, because the more hidden it remained, the greater the chances that this knowledge would pass through generations without being destroyed. This universe of forbidden gods also reveals something very profound about African spirituality. It was never static, never limited to a single pantheon or fixed names. There was always room for new revelations, for forces that manifested differently in each community, in each territory. This means that many of these deities did not gain the same prominence as the better-known Orishas, but that didn't make them any less important. On the contrary, they were local, intimate forces, connected to the daily lives of the people who worshipped them. This diversity demonstrates the richness and complexity of this tradition, which cannot be reduced to a simplistic view. Now, imagine what it would be like if these names, these stories, and these rituals had reached us with the same power as Greek or Roman narratives. How many deities would we have in our imagination today? How many symbols might we understand differently? But as we've seen, this silencing didn't happen by chance. These gods were hidden because they represented resistance, freedom, and access to a spiritual power that bowed to no one. And even when their worship was banned, they remained alive, kept in family secrets, in coded gestures, in words whispered from generation to generation. It is at this point that we realize something incredible. The oblivion was never total. These forbidden gods may have been erased from the books, but they remain present in small practices, in fragments of culture, in symbols that often go unnoticed. A seemingly innocent song, a folk dance, a simple offering in a river. All of these can carry within them the memory of a forgotten deity. It is as if they continue to speak, but only to those who know how to listen. This is the true hidden mystery, the silent presence of forces that never cease to exist, only learn to hide. And here I want to encourage you to reflect with me. Was this silence a form of protection? Could it be that, by remaining hidden, these gods ensured their survival to this day, waiting for the right moment to be recognized again? This is a powerful question, because it shows us that forgetting is often only apparent. Ancestral memory is never truly erased. It simply finds new ways to survive. Therefore, I'd love to hear your opinion. Right here in the comments, do you believe there are forgotten gods still among us, working silently? If you've made it this far, please also leave the phrase, "the secret lives," to show that you're connected to this journey of rescue. Your participation is essential for this message to reach more people, because each comment strengthens this dialogue and helps bring back to light what was hidden in the shadows. When we speak of the encounter of African traditions with other cultures, we enter one of the most intense chapters of this forbidden history. Here, we are not just facing common cultural clashes, but a true spiritual, political, and psychological war. Contact between African peoples and European colonizers, followed by the brutal imposition of slavery and the arrival of foreign religions, radically transformed the way African gods were worshipped, understood, and transmitted. This encounter was not balanced. It was not a fair exchange of knowledge, but rather a process of imposition, in which power and violence attempted to suffocate and erase that which, for centuries, sustained the spiritual identity of millions of people. Imagine men and women torn from their lands, separated from their families, and forced to live in inhumane conditions in completely different places. They not only lost their physical freedom, but were also targeted in a systematic attempt to strip them of their souls, their faith, and their bonds with the gods. For the colonizers and the dominant religions that arrived with them, it was not enough to exploit the bodies. It was also necessary to dominate the spirit. And it is at this point that the most cruel process of concealment begins, where African gods began to be treated as something dangerous, demonized, and even forbidden under threat of punishment. Slavery, in this context, was not only an economic system, but also a mechanism of cultural and spiritual silencing. Africans forcibly brought to other continents carried within themselves their traditions, their songs, their dances, their prayers, and their rituals. But upon arriving in foreign lands, they were often prevented from practicing them openly. The religions imposed by the colonizers attempted to replace them, preaching a worldview that devalued and criminalized everything connected to African spirituality. This persecution aimed not only to erase beliefs, but also to weaken resistance, because keeping ancestral faith alive was, in a way, keeping the strength to resist alive. But what's most impressive is that, even in the face of this brutality, African gods didn't disappear. They adapted, hid, and blended in. It was during this period that disguised cults emerged, where Orishas and other deities were venerated under the guise of Catholic saints or figures from dominant religions. Oxum, for example, could be associated with a saint, while Zango found a counterpart in another religious image. This strategy wasn't submission, but an act of intelligent resistance. Beneath the mask of permitted devotion, the continuation of a forbidden tradition was hidden. This apparent fusion gave rise to a fascinating and simultaneously painful phenomenon: religious syncretism. Many rituals were adapted to avoid attracting attention. Songs were sung in different languages. Symbols were hidden in everyday objects. And all of this allowed African gods to remain alive even under adverse conditions. This encounter with other cultures, therefore, was not only destruction, but also reinvention. It was in this process that many elements of the Afro-descendant religions we know today were shaped. However, we must recognize the weight of this forced blending. Although syncretism was a form of survival, it also contributed to the distortion of the original traditions. Many aspects were lost, many stories were forgotten, and the true essence of African gods was hidden beneath layers of external interpretations. This is one of the reasons why, to this day, there is so much prejudice and ignorance about these traditions. The negative image created by the colonizers was passed down from generation to generation, and even with resistance, the impact of this view is still present. Now, imagine with me the strength required to keep a tradition alive amidst so much oppression. Enslaved Africans needed courage to gather in secret, to dance and sing in secret, to celebrate their gods even knowing they could be punished for it. Every ritual was an act of resistance. Every word spoken in ancestral languages was a reminder of who they were. Every hidden symbol was a silent cry against erasure. This is true spiritual power, surviving even when everything seems to conspire against existence. And this is where the reflection becomes even deeper. The encounter with other cultures not only influenced the form of worship, but also showed the world that African spirituality is resilient, creative, and indestructible. No matter how many attempts were made to stifle it, it always found a way to reinvent itself. This leads us to realize that these gods, even when hidden, never ceased to act, never ceased to be present in the lives of those who worshipped them. They simply took on new forms, awaiting the moment when they could be recognized again in their fullness. And I want to invite you to think with me, if these traditions withstood centuries of persecution, what can we learn from this strength today? Don't we also carry within us this same capacity to resist, to reinvent ourselves, to keep the flame of what we believe burning, even in difficult times? This is a question that goes beyond history. It's an invitation to personal reflection. And since we're on this conversation, I want you to help me strengthen this recovery. Leave the phrase "resistance lives in me" in the comments to show that you also believe in the strength of this spirituality that survived the encounter with other cultures. And if you'd like, share what most caught your attention in this part of history: the brutality of slavery, the intelligence of syncretism, or the courage of secret rituals. Your participation is essential, because each comment is a way of breaking the silence and bringing back the voice of the gods they tried to hide. As we advance on this journey and overcome the barrier of encountering other cultures, we reach an even more fascinating and mysterious territory: the wisdom kept secret. If so far we've seen how African gods were hidden, persecuted, and even distorted, it is at this point that we discover how this forbidden knowledge managed to survive the centuries without being lost. The key to everything lay in the oral tradition, the chants, the symbols, and the codes carefully preserved by those who, even in the face of the most brutal oppression, never accepted the death of that which carried the strength of their ancestors. This wisdom was passed down not in books, not in official documents, but in the hearts, memories, and voices of each generation that understood the importance of keeping the forbidden history of African gods alive. Oral tradition has always been the great pillar of African cultures. Every word spoken by an elder was not just a teaching, but a sacred act, charged with spiritual power. What was spoken had the power to create, to protect, to transmit secrets that could not be revealed to just anyone. Thus, myths, legends, songs, and proverbs became veritable living libraries, where knowledge was not confined to pages, but flowed from mouth to mouth like a river that never stops flowing. This orality had a purpose: to preserve the essence, but also to hide from prying eyes that which should not be desecrated. Within this transmission system, chants occupied a special place. Each melody, each beat, each intoned word had a meaning that went far beyond what appeared on the surface. Sometimes a chant sounded like simple music, but in fact carried within it the invocation of an Orisha, the remembrance of a forgotten deity, or even guidance for conducting a ritual. These chants were passed down from generation to generation, adapting as necessary, but always maintaining the essence of the message. By singing, African peoples preserved not only the memory, but also the energy of the gods, because they believed that the human voice was a direct channel to the divine. Symbols were also powerful tools in this process of resistance. Often, seemingly simple drawings, marks, and objects concealed profound meanings. A necklace with specific colors, a wooden sculpture, a line drawn in the sand, all of these could carry a hidden message, understood only by the initiated. It was like a secret code, a parallel language that allowed African spirituality to survive even under the watchful eye of those who sought to erase it. These symbols were simultaneously protection and resistance because they kept knowledge alive without drawing unnecessary attention. And perhaps the most impressive detail is the discipline with which this wisdom was transmitted. Not just anyone could access everything. There were degrees of initiation, stages of learning, rites of passage that determined who was ready to carry certain secrets. This ensured that knowledge was not trivialized or corrupted, but preserved with respect and responsibility. This hierarchical structure protected tradition, ensuring that what was most sacred was not lost or misused. Now think with me, how could it be possible to completely erase a history that is recorded not on paper, but in the memory of a people? That's why, despite all the persecution, this wisdom survived. The dominators could burn books, ban rituals, punish practitioners, but they could never completely silence the voices that sang in secret, nor prevent symbols from being transmitted discreetly. This is the true power of oral and symbolic tradition. It is invisible to those who cannot interpret it, but unbreakable for those who carry ancestral memory. This secret wisdom also teaches us something profound about African spirituality. It is not static, it adapts, it transforms to survive. Even when a full ritual was not possible, small gestures were enough to maintain the connection with the gods. A word spoken to the wind, a simple offering discreetly placed in a river, a chant whispered in the dark, all these kept the flame burning. Every gesture, no matter how small, was a reminder that the hidden mystery remained alive. And here's something I want to emphasize. African peoples and their descendants understood that keeping secrets wasn't a weakness, but a strategy. The more forbidden the rituals, the more elaborate the forms of preservation became. Secrecy, in this context, became protection, a shield against destruction. It's as if the gods had found a safe haven in the darkness itself, waiting for the moment when they could emerge again with full force. Can you see how powerful all this is? While for many the absence of written records may seem like a loss, for African spirituality it was an advantage, because it prevented its deepest secrets from being corrupted or misused. This living memory, passed down from generation to generation, is indestructible because it inhabits the heart and soul of those who carry it. Now I want to invite you to reflect with me and actively participate in this conversation. What impresses you most about this form of preservation? The strength of orality, the power of chants, or the mystery of hidden symbols? Leave your perspective in the comments, and if you want to show that you're connected to this ancestral energy, write the phrase, "Memory does not die." This is the kind of interaction that strengthens our collective recovery and keeps alive this forbidden history that, for so long, was kept secret, but which we now have the opportunity to bring to light together. As we continue on this journey through the hidden mystery, we enter an even more captivating dimension, the unrevealed mysteries. If until now we've discussed the origin, the cosmic power of the Orishas, the forgotten and forbidden gods, and the wisdom kept secret, it is at this point that we delve into the stories and legends that remain shrouded in enigma, fueling the imagination of scholars, practitioners, and the curious around the world. These narratives are not just fragments of the past, but invisible threads connecting African spirituality to the present, reminding us that there is much more than has been revealed. What's most fascinating is realizing how, even with centuries of persecution and silencing, these legends remain alive, defying logic and awakening the feeling that we are faced with knowledge that cannot be fully deciphered. Among the most talked about mysteries are those involving the presence of gods in everyday events, manifestations that defy rational explanation and demonstrate that the sacred has never been removed from the human world. There are reports of natural phenomena that for many are considered the direct action of the Orishas or other deities, storms that suddenly arise during a ritual, animals that appear at specific moments as if they were messengers, or even dreams that reveal paths and answers to life's dilemmas. These episodes are seen as signs that the gods remain active, dialoguing with those willing to listen. Another layer of mystery involves stories transmitted only to a select few, initiated into certain cults, which speak of hidden sacred places, concealed objects of power, and knowledge that cannot be revealed to the general public. Legends tell of invisible cities guarded by the gods, portals connecting the physical world to the spiritual, and symbols that, when interpreted correctly, reveal secrets capable of transforming the lives of those who understand them. These accounts generate fascination because they remind us that the African spiritual universe is not limited, but expansive, full of layers and meanings that escape common comprehension. And here an important detail emerges. Many of these mysteries remain hidden precisely to protect their essence. Not everyone is prepared to handle this kind of knowledge, because it demands responsibility, discipline, and respect. Therefore, tradition has chosen to keep certain secrets silent, sharing them only with those who have undergone initiation rituals and proven themselves ready to carry this burden. This aspect reinforces the idea that African spirituality is not something superficial, but a profound path, full of symbols and revelations that must be discovered step by step. These enigmas also demonstrate how alive and dynamic the history of African gods is. It's not frozen in the past, but continues to reveal itself in unexpected ways. It's common to hear stories of people who, even without deep knowledge of the tradition, feel an inexplicable connection with certain Orishas, as if an ancestral memory were awakening within them. This phenomenon is interpreted by many as a sign that the gods never stopped communicating, merely waiting for the right moment to be recognized again. What makes these mysteries even more impactful is the fact that they continue to challenge even dedicated scholars. Researchers who delve into these traditions always find something that escapes them, something that cannot be recorded in words or captured in academic research. It is as if the mystery itself protects itself, as if there were an invisible barrier preventing certain truths from being revealed to everyone. This shows that African spirituality cannot be completely imprisoned by logic or intellect. It requires experience, surrender, and a direct connection with the sacred. And perhaps this is what intrigues us most, the feeling that there is still so much to be discovered. Unrevealed stories are invitations to look beyond the surface, to seek in the invisible the answers we often cannot find in the visible world. Each myth untold in its entirety, each interrupted legend, each fragment of narrative is like a half-open door to a vast universe that can only be accessed by those who allow themselves to immerse themselves body and soul in this ancient knowledge. Now I want to provoke you to reflect. What do you believe is still hidden behind these forbidden stories? Do you think there are secrets that will never be revealed, or that, little by little, they are returning to light through those who keep faith and tradition alive? This is a question that moves each of us, because it makes us realize that we are not mere spectators, but also participants in this ongoing mystery. And to keep this conversation going, I want you to leave your contribution in the comments. Write the phrase, "The mystery continues," to show that you too feel this energy that still pulses in the unrevealed stories of African gods. Also, share if you've had any personal experiences or heard any stories that seem to carry this touch of the inexplicable, because each comment is a way of keeping the dialogue open and showing that these enigmas continue to call us, inviting us to discover what remains hidden. Having arrived here, after traversing the paths of origin, cosmic forces, forgotten gods, cultural encounters, secret wisdom, and unrevealed mysteries, we enter a fundamental part of this journey, the spiritual legacy today. And it's impossible not to feel a chill when realizing how, despite centuries of persecution, attempts at erasure, and historical manipulation, African gods remain alive, present, and active in Afro-descendant religions, and even in modern expressions of spirituality that extend far beyond African borders. This legacy is not just memory, not just preserved tradition. It is a real force that manifests itself in the daily lives of millions of people who find in the Orishas, in the songs and in the rituals, a path of connection with the divine and with their own identity. Today, when we speak of Afro-descendant religions such as Candomblé, Umbanda, Batuque, Tambor de Mina, and so many other expressions spread throughout Brazil, Latin America, and the world, we are faced with a true testament to spiritual resilience. Every ritual performed, every resonating drum, every offering delivered to a river or at a crossroads is living proof that African gods have survived time, prejudice, and oppression. They continue to manifest themselves, appearing in dreams, in signs of nature, in energies that transform lives. This is the spiritual legacy that defies any idea of oblivion, because it shows that the sacred cannot be destroyed, only reinvented. And the most fascinating thing is that this legacy is not limited to the most well-known religious traditions. African spirituality has also found a place in the lives of people who, even without initiating a religion, feel the power of the Orishas and recognize their presence in their daily lives. When someone lights a candle to ask for protection, when they place flowers in the ocean, when they chant a prayer for courage or balance, they are often, without realizing it, connecting with these ancestral energies. It's as if the gods have broken down formal barriers, reaching hearts seeking meaning, connection, and spirituality in an increasingly chaotic world. This movement toward spiritual recovery is even more important in the modern context, where so many people feel disconnected, empty, and searching for something that gives them purpose. African gods offer exactly that, a path to reconnection with nature, with community, and with our own spirit. They remind us that we are not separate from the universe, but part of it, an expression of the same energy that moves the winds, waters, fire, and earth. This perception is increasingly gaining traction in contemporary spiritual practices, which draw inspiration from ancestral wisdom to rediscover balance and meaning. It's interesting to note how, in many spaces, the Orishas are seen not only as religious figures, but as archetypes of universal human forces. Ogum as the warrior who opens paths, Oxum as the expression of love and prosperity, Iansa as transformation and courage, Zango as justice, Obatala as wisdom, Exu as communication and freedom. These archetypes help us understand that the spiritual legacy of African gods is simultaneously collective and individual. It touches the life of the community, but also resonates within each person, offering ways to deal with challenges, pain, and achievements. Another fundamental aspect of this legacy is its strong identity. For Black and Afro-descendant communities, keeping the connection with African gods alive is also a way to affirm their roots, to reclaim a history that has been silenced, and to value a spirituality that, for too long, was treated as taboo. Every time a torero opens its doors, every time a drum circle is formed, every time a chant echoes, it is history itself that rises up against erasure. Today's spiritual legacy is therefore also a struggle for recognition, respect, and cultural appreciation. But that's not all. This legacy also interacts with modernity in surprising ways. There are artists, writers, musicians, and creators who find inspiration in the Orishas for their works, spreading symbols, stories, and energies through art. There are people who, in meditation, personal development, or alternative therapies, turn to ancestral African wisdom as a source of balance and healing. This shows that African gods are not trapped in the past, but walk side by side with the present, finding new ways to manifest themselves and continue to touch lives. And here I want to draw your attention to a powerful detail. Today's spiritual legacy is not only proof of survival, but also proof of expansion. What was once forbidden, hidden, and marginalized now finds space to be celebrated and shared. Prejudice still exists, resistance still exists, but every day more people approach this tradition with respect and curiosity. It's as if the gods, after centuries of enforced silence, are speaking again with greater intensity, finding new voices and new spaces to echo. Now I want to hear from you, who are following me. How do you view this spiritual legacy today? Do you feel these traditions still carry the same power as they did in the past? Do you believe they play an important role in a world seeking spirituality and connection? If you've made it this far, leave the phrase, "The legacy lives in me," in the comments to show that you too recognize this ancestral force that transcends time and reaches the present day. Also, share your experiences or reflections, because each comment is a way of keeping this legacy alive. amplifying the voice of the African gods who continue to guide us to this day. If you stayed with me until the end of this video, first, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because it shows that you are truly committed to delving deep into this hidden mystery and rediscovering the forbidden history of the African gods with me. And since you've made it this far, I want to ask you 3 simple but very important things. First, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos, because there are still many powerful revelations to come. Second, leave a like, because that helps YouTube understand the value of this content and allows it to reach many more people. And third, comment below with the phrase, "I made it to the end," because I'll know who really stayed until the last minute and is part of this community that's growing with me. Oh, and don't forget to click on the next video that's appearing on the screen, because the learning doesn't stop here, and I'm sure you'll want to continue this journey with me.